Chapter 4 will focus on ethical and social issues in information systems. There are numerous examples of business ethical failures that we could talk about. Think about how information systems, or their absence, might have been related to the 2008-2009 financial crisis in the US. The investment banks that suffered heavy losses and individuals who were able to defraud investors of millions. What role did IS have in the crisis? In several large-scale financial crimes, systems were used to fool investors, regulators, and investigators and hide an underlying crime. Think about ethical dilemmas that are presented by information systems and new developments in technology. Privacy is an important issue. When we think about business models, such as Google, Facebook, and many other sites, they depend on getting users, or us, to give up their personal information so that it can be used to market and sell them products. Can you think of any examples of how IT has challenged some area of ethics, social life, or legal arrangements? For example, posting of hate messages or photos to embarrass people are just a few examples. The introduction of new information technology has a ripple effect, raising new ethical, social, and political issues that must be dealt with on the individual, social, and political levels. These issues have 5 moral dimensions: information rights and obligations, property rights and obligations, system quality, quality of life, and accountability and control. The graphic displays the 5 moral dimensions that we just mentioned. Can you think of an example of each of the 5 major issues? For example, an issue dealing with information rights might be: what rights do individuals possess with respect to themselves? What do they have a right to protect? An issue dealing with quality of life might be: what values should be preserved in an information and knowledge-based society? An issue dealing with system quality might be: what standards of data and system quality should we demand to protect individual rights and the safety of society? Which of these trends do you believe might have the most adverse consequences? Why? Do the positives outweigh the negatives on all of these issues? Why or why not? Online profiling is one of the most controversial computer-related ethical, social, and political issues today. Although it is used fairly extensively on the internet, it's also used by insurance firms, health insurance firms, casinos, and of course, national authorities around the globe for finding potential terrorists. NORA technology can take information about people from disparate sources and find obscure, non-obvious relationships. It might discover, for example, that an applicant for a job at a casino shares a telephone number with a known criminal and issue an alert to the hiring manager. NORA is used by both the government and the private sector for its profiling capabilities. Can you provide potential examples of NORA, other than the one mentioned, for both governmental and business purposes? One such example might be an airline identifying potential terrorists attempting to board a plane. Another might be government identifying potential terrorists by monitoring phone calls. Information systems do not exist in a vacuum, and these concepts are instrumental in understanding the impact of systems and measuring their success. Do you understand why liability and due process are such important ethical concepts? It's important to provide recourse to individuals negatively affected by mismanagement of information systems, providing incentive to play by the rules. Do you believe that any aspect of ethical analysis is lacking from this process? If so, what? Can you think about an example of an ethical dilemma and how you would resolve it using this process? It's important to understand the difference between the categorical imperative and the slippery slope rule. Briefly, the difference is that the categorical imperative spans the entirety of the populace, whereas the slippery slope rule applies to decisions of one person over time. For example, the categorical imperative applies to an employee who tries to steal money from his employer. He shouldn't do this because if all employees attempted to do so, the company would fail. The slippery slope rule applied to the same situation might run as follows. Although the employees stealing $1 from the company would not lead to any true problem, repeatedly stealing $1 or stealing a lot of dollars would be unacceptable and ultimately lead to the destruction of the company. How does the quote-unquote no free lunch rule relate to copyrights, patents, or trademarks? The appearance of unethical behavior is as harmful as actual unethical behavior at times. So adherence to those principles are critical. In an age of open source software, how does the principle of no free lunch work out? Open source software is an example of an economic good which is licensed by the creator for distribution, often without charge or even attribution. In this case, there is a free lunch, but it occurs because the creators of the software consent to the arrangement. Other ethical dilemmas include companies trying to use new systems to reduce the size of their workforce, such as consumer product companies using automated customer service systems to reduce the need for humans to answer customer questions. In cases like these, right and wrong are not clearly defined, but instead, contrasting values are at odds with one another. Do you believe there are sufficient protections for privacy in law? If not, what are possible methods of developing appropriate privacy protections? Can you explain what is meant by a mutuality of interest between record holder and the individual? In a simple explanation, the individual wants to engage in a transaction, and the record holder needs information about the individual to support the transaction. Both parties are interested both are interested parties in the transaction. Do you believe that the websites that you visit actually disclose their data collection and utilization practices? Is it difficult to find where they list those? Pull up an example of a website. Read parts of its privacy policy. Do you know what it represents? Often, so-called privacy policies are actually terms of service agreements, and the word privacy is not even mentioned. EU protections of privacy are far more powerful than the US because they require informed consent before a firm can do anything with personal information besides support the transaction at hand. In Europe, there is no junk postal mail, for instance, because advertising firms are prohibited from using personal information obtained from third parties and without the consent of the individual. How do you feel about these technologies? Cookies can be useful at trusted sites, but perhaps invasive at others. Have you had any experience with spyware or web bugs on your own computers? Do you or how would you know if you were being tracked? Do you believe that businesses should be pressed to provide more comprehensive privacy protections online? Businesses prefer the looser regulation, but individuals overall may not. Most individuals do not take the proper steps to ensure their own privacy in any case. Most people do not know how to protect their privacy online. Does that mean that privacy is unimportant or that people don't care? Not necessarily the case. Cookies are written by a website on a visitor's hard drive. When the visitor returns to that website, the web server requests the ID number from the cookie, and it uses it to access the data stored by that server on that visitor. The website can then use these data to display personalized information. Do you believe that property rights, guaranteed by copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets, are strong enough to avoid the theft of intellectual property online? Some may be unwilling to admit to infringing upon intellectual property rights, but are you familiar with the ability to use the internet to bypass intellectual property protections? Do you believe that legislation such as the DMCA is having any effect? Do you have any friends who download quote-unquote free music from P2P sites or free videos? Do you have an opinion about when software is good enough? Does it depend on the particular product? For example, distinguish between software used by air traffic controllers and software used for word processing. Do you believe that there are different levels of acceptable quality for those products? Have you ever witnessed any of these negative consequences firsthand? It's likely that if not, you know someone who has become dependent on their computer to some extent or have even experienced something similar firsthand. Which of the above consequences do you feel is the most alarming? Do you believe that the end result of continuing advances in information technology will be rising unemployment and a small number of elite corporate professionals? And lastly, have you encountered any of these health risks, either from personal experience or someone they know? From firsthand experience, I can tell you carpal tunnel syndrome is not something fun to experience. Recently, I underwent surgery on both of my wrists for that issue exactly. And so these things are real, and we need to think about how we can protect ourselves as we continue to deal with technology.